We find ourselves entering into October, just celebrating in September some beautiful feasts. Padre Pio on September 23rd, the Archangels September 29th, among others. And then looking forward into October, we begin with St. Therese, and then October 4th, St. Francis of Assisi. It reminds us there are always these treasures to celebrate. The rhythm of our church, the rhythm of faith, the celebrations of the saints, the celebrations of important feast days like October the 7th, the Feast of the Holy Rosary. All of that reminds us our faith can and should be woven into our daily lives. And I specifically wanted to reflect with you as we've just come out of September and entering into October with Saint Pio of Pietrelcina, Padre Pio is as he's known, and Saint Francis of Assisi. One thing that these two great saints had in common was the Stigmata. We're probably all aware of what the Stigmata is. Actually, in their hands and their feet, actually being marked with in very often deeply painful ways, as Christ himself experienced those wounds as he was crucified. But a stigmatist is marked with the wounds of Christ. I think that teaches us so much about our own faith journey. I mean, there aren't many. There are others besides St. Pio of Pietrelcina and St. Francis of Assisi, but there aren't many stigmatists in the history of the church. And what I believe it reminds us of is with both of these great saints, even in their lifetime, they were known, and of course, the stigmata occurs as they're living persons in this world, bearing those marks of pain. And from what I've read of both Padre Pio and St. Francis, they experienced tremendous pain with these wounds, spiritually and physically entering into the passion of Christ. I think that teaches us something very important of the significance of the suffering of Jesus Christ as he suffered and died for us to free us from sin and death. We need to all ponder, and we certainly do with the sorrowful mysteries of the Rosary, with the Stations of the Cross, that I encourage us to pray all through the year. But Christ truly and deeply suffered. And these saints, why did this happen to them? Because they are deeply connected to Christ. I think that teaches us something very important. These saints who knew Christ so deeply and had an intimate relationship with him, that relationship reached the crescendo of actually sharing in the pain of his wounds as he was painfully crucified, died on a cross. In the mystery of Jesus Christ, who was fully God and fully man, I think it really intersects there with his death on the cross. Here is God's divine Son who is dying on a cross. This sacred body that is divine and human dies. And the mystery of how can God die? Well, he did it out of love, out of the sacrifice of love that is represented in the totality of who Jesus Christ is. And reminding us that when we live to whatever degree we can, that sacrifice of love, what happens in the story of Christ? His resurrection. The glory of his resurrection is always there, reminding us it's not just deeply painful suffering, but it's suffering with a purpose. It's redemptive suffering. And so I think St. Francis and St. Pio of Pietrelcina both remind us, as saints deeply committed to Christ, deeply living his life, they live that redemptive suffering. And I think that's another aspect of what these stigmatists teach us, that our pain, our suffering, our sacrificial living is significant as well. The cross and suffering are woven into our Christian lives and our Catholic lives especially. If we look at the Eucharist, if we look at living our Catholic faith, the reality of suffering and death having been conquered, but something that we need to experience in the terms of Jesus Christ in his saving glory. I think the stigmatists remind us of that. We live in a time that shies away from suffering and pain. And very often it may be seen as compassionate to remove pain from someone's life. Certainly, we don't need to needlessly seek out suffering and pain, but we should embrace it as something that is joining us to the passion of Christ. We speak of suffering souls sometimes, and that's a kind of a mystery of some seem to be chosen to deeply suffer, like St. Francis and St. Pio of Pietrelcina, Padre Pio. Both of them not only suffered in their stigmata, the wounds of Christ, but suffered deeply as they journeyed with Christ throughout their lives. I think it reminds us of that powerful redemptive suffering that all of us can enter into. And I know my mother used to tell us, offer it up. And it's connected to all of that, to recognize that pain is not something to always be pushed aside and eliminated. We need to, at times, endure some pain. And whether we choose to or not, we're going to endure some pain in this journey of life. Spiritually speaking, we can embrace it as joining us more deeply to the love of Christ. His sacred heart is wounded, but it's still a sacred heart of love. And I think St. Francis and St. Pio of Pietrelcina would both testify to us that they know deeply the love of Christ. Yes, suffering is woven into it, but Jesus Christ shows us that through suffering, love flourishes and shines brightly in unimaginable ways. So let us take the pain and suffering in our own journey. The crosses we bear is not something to be rejected, but something to be spiritually incorporated to walking with Christ.